What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This here is Legitical Response. I cover political news, and I got an interesting article for you guys today. It's something coming from left-wing sources, kind of railing against Tim Walz here. It's a pretty good article, and I want to get into it because it discusses George Floyd, and a lot of people dislike my take on this. They dislike my take a lot. It's kind of a controversial take, although it shouldn't be, but it is. Like the last video I did on Derek Chauvin's appeal, I got a lot of views on that, and I got a lot of people coming in saying I was wrong and all this other stuff. Well, you know, once you start looking into the evidence, you drop the narrative that you've been sown, like that the corporate press has fed to you to twist the narrative and to make you think what they want you to think. If you can somehow drop your preconceived notions of what has been, unburdened by what can be, then we can have a discussion here and we can look into this. But let's go ahead and get into it right quick, because I think I might be able to change some of you guys' minds on this. Check this out, y'all. Sharp divisions persist over Walz's response to the riots that followed the murder of George Floyd. Now, you love how they say that, the murder of George Floyd. Well, yeah, that's not so concrete. Even though, you know, of course, we got court documents, court precedent that says that George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin. So, yeah, they can get away with saying that. However, when you look into the nuance of the situation, it's not so clear-cut. And that's what I posited in my video about that. Like, it's really not so clear-cut. Once you look at the independent autopsy report that was put out, and it lists the litany of drugs that was in his system and the amounts of drugs that it was in his system, the damage to George Floyd's neck that was really insignificant, basically shows that Derek Chauvin did not murder George Floyd, that the cause of his death was all the litany of drugs that was in his system, right? That was an eye-opening moment for me. That changed my mind. And then you come to find out the corporate press lied about a lot of that situation, right? Like, I blame the corporate press for stoking the riots of 2020, for lying about George Floyd's death, because they just told you, basically, a white cop killed a black man for no reason. That's pretty much how they said it, right? Not telling you all the details about the situation. There's a lot of details about the situation that might just change a lot of people's minds on this. You're not going to change everybody's minds on this. But let's get into it, and then we'll talk about it. Check it out, y'all. Tim Walz faced the biggest crisis of his political career when Minnesota's two largest cities erupted in protests and riots after a white Minneapolis police officer killed George Floyd. Now, once again, see, this is what the corporate press does. There was no need whatsoever to say that Derek Chauvin was white. Everybody knows that. Why did they put that in there? I don't know. They do this a lot. This is what I mean by stoking racism in this country. They're adding Marxist undertones to this to make it about race and not about what actually happened, not about police malfeasance, in other words. They make it about race instead of the actual situation as to what it should be. It's crazy, y'all. It's just the black man's murder in 2020 sparked a nationwide reckoning over racial discrimination and police misconduct. Yeah, no, it was over police misconduct. It wasn't racial discrimination, right? Because most racial discrimination had been eliminated by that time. Sure, you've got racial discrimination on an individual level, like certain people do. I'm talking about institutional racial discrimination is outright illegal, and anybody that shows any kind of discrimination whatsoever, you can sue whoever discriminated against you into oblivion, for crying out loud. It's always going to be there on an individual level. Some sort of racial discrimination. Sorry, get over it. It's always going to happen. Like right now, the white people are being racially discriminated against, and it's crazy. It's like, are we going backwards now in the other direction? And for what reason? That's only going to sow more division. Let's stop with all the racism. I think it needs to come to a complete stop. But once again, you're probably not going to be able to convince everybody of that. But it does need to stop. We need to stop putting race out there in the forefront, because it doesn't matter whatsoever what somebody's freaking skin color is. I mean, really, does that matter whatsoever? No, it shouldn't. But his death and its complicated aftermath tested Walz's leadership at one of the state's most consequential moments. Yes, that's right. What the governor did or failed to do during and after the violence in Minneapolis and St. Paul drew sharp criticism from Republicans in Minnesota. Nor did it satisfy some progressives who had urged him to take bolder steps to remake policing in the state. And what they mean to say about that is just totally eliminate the police whatsoever. That's one of the most insane ideas I think I've ever heard. Like, really? Get rid of our law enforcement? How are you going to enforce laws? And some of the proposals are crazy. Oh, well, hey, we got a domestic dispute over here. Let's send a psychiatrist over there to go talk to the people. What? Right, the psychiatrist is going to show up. The dude's agitated. He's going to be pissed. Now you're just adding more victims, potentially, to the situation. Like, what are you thinking here? Like, no, we need somebody, an authority figure, to show up to calm the situation down. Do they need some more training? Sure, I'll give you that one. We do maybe need to rethink policing. We need some more training in situations like this, right? Like, I understand totally that certain cops need better de-escalatory training. They need to de-escalate. They need to learn how to remove their emotions from the situation and just go in an unbiased manner. Just calm the situation down, right? Psychiatrists showing up is not going to be able to do that, folks. You're putting somebody in a weaker position, and it's just not going to end well in certain instances. Will it work for some? Sure. But you're potentially adding more victims, like I said. Walz's defenders say he did an exemplary job under unprecedented circumstances. Sorry about that, y'all. 4 years later, on the national stage as the Democratic nominee for vice president, Walz is facing similar questions and criticism. Republicans are calling him a left-wing radical who was too slow to act, and some progressives are saying he was not radical enough in addressing police abuses. Yeah. I say he's a far radical. He's a radical left-winger. Yeah, and these progressives are just insane. But they got to throw that other perspective in there because, yeah, there's nothing but criticism of Tim Walz. Like, his entire family, not his immediate family, but the rest of his family has come out for Trump. And it's funny. Walz is for Trump. That's just one of the most hilarious things I think I've ever seen. It's just crazy. A review by the Associated Press based on government documents, consultant reports, news accounts, video and audio recordings, as well as interviews with families, activists, lawyers, and public officials, paints a nuanced picture of how Walz handled the challenge. As a relatively new governor, he tried to balance the competing pressures and interests of local and federal officials, including then-President Donald Trump, while navigating the dangers posed by fast-evolving protests and riots taking place amid a deadly global pandemic. He defended how local, state, and federal authorities work together and said it should serve as a model for other states. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's wrong. It shouldn't, but he said it. I'm proud of Minnesota's response. I'm proud of Minnesota's first responders who were out there, from firefighters to police to the National Guard to citizens that were out there, he said. Fateful days in May. Floyd was killed on May 25th, 2020, Memorial Day. Bystander video of his cries of "I can't breathe" spread quickly, stoking outrage, which, hang on, right? Like, that's one of the other things. I can't breathe. If you can't breathe, you can't say "I can't breathe." You can't talk if you really can't breathe. You know why he was having trouble breathing? The litany of drugs taking effect in his body. Yes, he was overdosing at the time. That's what led to his death, not the knee on his neck and lower back, because it was in between where his neck starts and his lower back, according to the autopsy report. And that's what I don't get. The corporate press, right? Like the county sheriff that did the original autopsy report ruled that yeah, Derek Chauvin is the cause for it. But when we did an independent autopsy, and they came out with all these drugs in his system, that told a much different story, right? And I'm going to go ahead and tell that freaking story right now, right? So, and this is coming from memory. I just so happen to not research this, but I think I'll do an okay job. You know, I think George Floyd punched a pregnant woman. I do remember that. But as far as the arrest situation, he was trying to spend counterfeit money. Okay, right off the top. He's the reason the cops were called in the first place. Now, this is pure speculation, but I believe it explains the litany of drugs that was in his system, is that he had all these drugs on him. The cops were called. Cops show up. He throws all these drugs, tries to swallow all of it. Right? That's why he overdosed. But, needless to say, so he gets into an altercation with cops. He tries to escape. Gets arrested. Gets thrown into the back of a cop car. This is something the corporate press failed to say. He was sitting perfectly safe, handcuffed in the back of a cop car with the air conditioner going. Just fine. Perfectly safe. Said he couldn't breathe in the cop car because he's overdosing. So guess what? They take him out of the cop car. Set him on the ground. He tries to escape again. Once again. You don't try to escape from the cops when you're already handcuffed, dude. Like, you're going to get tackled, you're going to get put on the ground, and they're going to forcefully hold you down. Once again, Derek Chauvin should have never went to trial for murder. Now, do I agree that he shouldn't have put his knee on his neck for that long? Totally agree. I agree with everybody on that one. Yes, he shouldn't have done that. But looking at the autopsy report, you also must agree that that was not the cause of his death. There was insignificant damage. Still damage, sure, but insignificant damage to his neck area. And it did not cut off his airway, his air path right there. Did not cut it off whatsoever. Once again, the reason he was having trouble breathing was because of the litany of drugs that was in his system. He overdosed on drugs. It wasn't from a knee on the neck. Now, even the court agreed that Derek Chauvin could not get a fair trial. You know what the judge said, right? The corporate press didn't report on this either. Don't know. Don't care. He's not going to get a fair trial anywhere, so let's just do it anyway. What? That's one of the most insane things I think I've ever heard, right? Right? We can all agree that, sure, he can't get a fair trial. He cannot get a fair trial. So you throw the trial out, for crying out loud. Charge him with something different. Don't charge him with murder. So he was convicted of second-degree murder, for crying out loud. That's just ridiculous. Negligent homicide at best. At best. For real. Like, it's just insane to me. The protests were mostly peaceful at first, albeit with some vandalism and clashes with police as leaders struggled to balance the free speech rights of protesters against the need to protect public safety. Major looting started on May 27th. 2 nights later, a Target store was plundered, an auto parts store, and several other businesses were torched. The police chief asked the mayor to seek help from the National Guard. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey would later say the governor hesitated, an accusation that Walz would deny. Now, I understand this. I totally understand that decision. Right? You don't care about the people in your state. I totally see why he did it. Was it a good idea? No, it wasn't. You should have immediately called the National Guard. But, once again, that's looking at it in hindsight. We can all play Monday morning quarterback here and say that. But at the time, did Tim Walz know that this situation was going to get that out of hand? Of course not. Nobody did. Absolutely. I can be absolutely fair in this one that hesitating to call in the National Guard. But once again, when the National Guard did get there, yeah, they were totally unprepared for the situation. We'll get into that, though. We'll get into that. Walz, a 24-year National Guard veteran, approved a limited activation on May 28th to protect firefighters and the state capitol complex and declared the peacetime emergency, though he continued to leave most of the response in the hands of local authorities. Now, at that time, the riots were starting to get really out of hand. They should have been fully activated, for a matter of fact. That was a poor decision on his part. Once again, you could call it playing Monday morning quarterback. Don't care. Look at the situation on the ground. Riots were, at that point, were already starting all over the place, right? There were already protests starting, right? So this appeared to be quickly to get out of hand very fast, very fast. And we had no idea there were going to be riots all over the entire country. But it got out of hand way too quickly. The local PD was not equipped for this, and that was plain to see. That was very plain to see. Tough decision, though. I ain't gonna lie. I'll give him that one. It was a tough decision. The destruction only worsened that night. Protesters took control of the 3rd Precinct station, which soon caught fire and was destroyed. Guard troops did not arrive at the police station until several hours later in the early hours of May 29th. That day, Walz criticized the abject failure of the city's response. What do you mean the abject failure of the city's response? Right? They're not equipped for that massive of a protest. Abject failure? Of course they failed. They are not the National Guard. They are not a standing army. It's a police department, for crying out loud, and a sheriff's office, for goodness sakes. I'm sure they had some state police in there too. But these local PDs, they're not equipped for mass rioting like that. Not in those cities, at least. So it just blows my mind that Governor Walz would come out and say that about the city police. After looking at the wide-scale destruction that was going on currently, people took over the police station, and then he's going to call it an abject failure. Do you really think that the police can handle that? They were run out of their own headquarters, for crying out loud. That's just insane. And to another point, what's the point in that? Why burn down local businesses? Why loot a Target store? That's the bad part of all this. These rioters, these BLM protesters, used a protest as the impetus for looting a store to get more stuff for themselves. It's insane. And did anybody in the federal government call them domestic terrorists when they were actively domestically terrorizing the entire nation? No, they didn't. You didn't hear a single person from the corporate press call this an insurrection. No, but you get a bunch of bumbling idiots at the Capitol, right? Oh, but that's an insurrection. That's the worst thing since Pearl Harbor, for crying out loud. When another nation invaded U.S. territory, a couple of hundred bumbling idiots rioting at the Capitol was worse than that, or as bad as that, or the worst thing since then. I'm sorry, these people are insane, outright insane to say that. It's clear that they had a bias, very clear that they had a bias here. And how the hell did this video get from talking about Tim Walz to talking about Pearl Harbor? I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. He said the state would take control and he imposed a nighttime curfew. Yeah, I think we're not even going to finish covering that entire story right there because I've already gone freaking 20 minutes on this thing. So we can look at some of the actions of Tim Walz and I can say, okay, yeah, it's nuanced. Sure. We had an unprecedented riot, an insurrection going on in our country that we haven't seen in a very long time. People don't know how to handle this situation. You can criticize Tim Walz for how he handled it, sure. But could anybody have handled it any better? Maybe. Maybe they could have, but maybe not. Maybe somebody different, maybe even a Republican, would have handled it much worse. Much, much worse. It's possible. We can't say either way, But to criticize Tim Walz for this, sure, there's genuine criticism, but to say it's a bad thing, no. These people, you want a line of attack on Tim Walz, look at his freaking policies. I've covered several stories, right? He's got a de facto ban on Christian teachers in his state. And I call it a de facto ban because it's not an outright ban. But these people have to adhere to this gender ideology garbage and race Marxism to be a teacher. They have to acknowledge it and affirm it to their students. That's insane. It's totally insane. And I covered that story as well. It just blows my mind that they're trying to do this. I had somebody leave a comment saying, "Oh, well, you're criticizing for separating church and state." That was one of the most ridiculous arguments I think I've ever heard. No, but people have a freedom of expression. If affirming somebody's delusion goes against their freedom of expression supersedes affirming their delusion. I'm sorry. You can look at that however you want. That has nothing to do with separation of powers, for crying out loud. That was one of the most ridiculous arguments I think I've ever heard. Like really? Like, what does that have to do with separation of powers? Nothing whatsoever. People have their beliefs, and you're going to force them to affirm something that goes against their beliefs. That is totally wrong. They're not trying to put their freedom of religion, impose their religion onto you, but that's what you are trying to do to them. That's exactly what they're trying to do. And they're going to argue for separation of powers. One of the most ridiculous arguments I've ever heard in my entire freaking life. And yeah, I'll talk directly to you, person. I forget the person's name, but it was one of the most stupidest comments I think I've ever come across. Like, really. Like, that's exactly what they're doing to the Christian teachers. But this goes to criticizing Tim Walz for his policies, for things that there's actual genuine criticisms, because sure, responding to a devolving situation is one thing. Having a bad response to that's one thing. But actually putting together policies that go against the Constitution is an entire different thing. That's where we need our criticisms to be. Not with how he responded to the riots. Yeah, I don't think there's a good line of attack there, to be honest with you, if I'm being fair. Once again, like I said, you can attack him for it, whatever, but that line of attack's not going to work. Go after him where it matters, where it absolutely matters. These people are trying to destroy the country, and then they'll get out there and say, "Oh, well, Trump wants to destroy the Constitution." He's never said that. That's a lie. Don't let the corporate press narrative fool you, because they're very good at narrative sowing, as a matter of fact. But I think I've rambled on for long enough on this one. I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. That's all I got for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. Y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.